Hi friends, it's Kristine Vicente with Queen City Stamp Art, and today I have a Paper Pumpkin extra card for you. If you subscribed to the March 2025 Paper Pumpkin kit called Daisy Daydream, you're going to love this card. I'm using the stamp set from the kit and a few extra products to create my card. So let's get crafting. Okay, so the cards that were part of this kit were designed up just like this. I just made them up exactly as the directions stated, and I think they're beautiful. I love them exactly how they are. The only thing I did differently was swap out some of the sentiments from what they had listed. I felt like the sweetest birthday wishes was going to be very useful for me, so most of the cards are for birthdays. But I did love the gorgeous cards in this kit. And so this kit came with an extra stamp set. So this was the kit stamp set. It had the bee and some extra wings, a little honeycomb, and then a variety of sentiments, which were really very useful. Then it also came with an extra stamp set this month, and that had a larger honeycomb, a pretty floral image, and then an extra happy birthday and a hello. And I love that. So there were a couple of stamp sets, and I have them here. We're going to be using these to make the extra card today. I also always purchase the dies that coordinate with the 3 months of Paper Pumpkin kits. So this Spring is in the Air die set coordinates with the January through March, and it has a heart shape that I believe coordinated with the January kit. It had a chives, a leaf and flower for the chives from the February kit, and the March kit, of course, had the honeycomb and the little detail bee. So we're going to be using the honeycomb from the die set today, and I'll pull in a couple of extra products that we're going to be using. So we're going to be using Stampin' Blends markers in Daffodil Delight and Lost Lagoon. We're also going to be using a Memento Black ink pad to stamp with, and some Lemon Lolly ink to stamp with, and then also a little bit of the Baker's Twine from the Essential Baker Twine pack in the annual catalog. You can find this on the Stampin' Up website. I also pulled in some tape runner adhesive and the leftover dimensional adhesive from the kit. So we're going to be using that as well. So let's go ahead and get started stamping. The first thing you're going to need is a little kit, and I have the measurements for these pieces in the description of the video. So if you check that out, you can pause the video, get the dimensions, and craft along with me if you like. We're going to be using a card base in Lemon Lolly, and you can of course switch out the colors, just use whatever you have. I'm using Lemon Lolly as my card base. This measures 8.5 by 5.5, and I scored it in half at 4 1/4. We also have a few additional pieces. This piece is the inside of the layer for the card, so that's 4 by 5 1/4. I have a little scrap of gold foil cardstock. I love to keep a little bit of specialty cardstock on hand, especially gold foil when I'm working with the Paper Pumpkin stamp sets, because oftentimes Stampin' Up! Paper Pumpkin kits have gold foil accents. So this is a fun way to die cut extra accents in the gold foil to kind of mimic the original cards. And I thought that the die cut of this honeycomb would be beautiful in the gold foil. You're going to need a piece that measures about 2.5 by 4, a little 1/4 inch piece for your sentiment, and then another scrap, any size scrap. You just need to have room to stamp one of those bees, so we can fussy cut that out because there is no die for that. So these are all the little pieces we're going to need. So why don't we start with the stamping? I'm going to bring in a couple of extra blocks. I've got my D size my full-size D block, and I also have a C block that I'm going to be using. And so let's go ahead and get started first with the larger honeycomb from this stamp set. This is from the extra stamp set, and I'm just going to mount this on my block, and I'm going to use my Lemon Lolly ink pad. And we're going to do a little bit of stamping on the card base. So I'm going to fold this in half, And I'm going to use my bone folder to get a nice crisp fold. And then I'm going to ink this up in the lemon lolly ink. And I'm going to give this card base a little bit of a background. So I'm going to stamp it once here toward the top left, and then once here toward the bottom left. So I'm kind of going on the diagonal. So that's the first step. And then while I have this ink out, I think I'm going to grab a little piece of scrap paper, and I'm going to stamp a little bit of honeycomb on the inside piece too, just to give it some interest. So I'll just stamp that in both of the corners. And then we can move on to the black ink. So let's go ahead and stamp our bee. So the bee image is from the original stamp set that goes with the kit. Oops. And I'm just going to use some Memento black ink to stamp the bee. I'm going to ink that up nice and solid and just stamp it right on my scrap. And then we're going to use the Memento black ink pad to stamp the flower as well. So let me go ahead and get a baby wipe. And I'm going to clean off this honeycomb so that I can use this block. Just like that. And I'm going to put the bee back on the paper there. And then we're going to use this bigger block to stamp the floral image. And I'm going to stamp that on this little 2.5 by 4 inch piece. So, or 2 1/4. Let me see what size this is. I can't remember. Yeah, 2.5. So it's 2.5 inches by 4 inches. So this piece, we're going to stamp 2 of these little flower clusters. And I'm going to do one toward the top. And then one toward the bottom. I'm just going to turn it around like this, just like that. And then we can clean this up and put it back. And then I'm going to use the thank you image for the sentiment. So there's a little thank you that came with this, and I'm going to stamp the sentiment on this little white piece. Just like that. And that's it for the stamping. So now I'm going to bring in my blends markers, and we're going to do a little bit of coloring. So I'm going to start with my dark daffodil, and I'm just going to color in the bee body where it's white so that we have a yellow and black bee. Turns it into a nice little bumblebee, just like that. And then I'm also going to use yellow, but I'm going to start with the lighter one. And I'm going to color in the center of my daisies. And then I'm going to add a little bit of dark to the bottom portion there. And then I'm going to blend that out with the light, just to give it a little bit of a shading. Then I'm going to take the Lost Lagoon markers, and I love our blends markers for coloring. I'm going to start with the light ones, and I'm going to color in the leaves. And I picked this color because I think yellow and Lost Lagoon look really nice together, but you could really pick any green. So I'm just coloring the leaves in here. And we're going to do the bottom set as well. this is kind of a small image, so it colors in pretty quickly. And you can, of course, if you don't like to use Stampin' Blends markers, you could color with like watercolor pencils or a watercolor brush. You just have to use a different ink pad. Probably the Stays On ink, so it didn't blend out. Then, or the black didn't bleed. Then we're going to take this dark Lost Lagoon, and I'm just going to add a little bit of dark along the veining in the leaves. And then again, like I did with the daffodil marker, I'm just going to blend it out a little bit. It's not too sophisticated, but it gives it kind of a nice shaded appearance. So it gives it a little bit of dimension. I'm just kind of going over it lightly, just to add another layer of color. And then you'll be able to see kind of the lights and darks. So that's it for the bees. Now I want to turn this into a little tag. And so the way to do this, there's a couple of different ways. You could use, like, if you have a tag topper punch, you could probably make this panel less than 2 inches, but you're going to lose some of the leaves on each side. But you could always slide it into your tag topper punch and punch a little tag. Or if you have the very best trio punch, you could make it a tag using that punch. Any size, because you just kind of slide it in and it'll cut off the corners. But let's just say you don't have any way to make this a tag except with your scissors. I'm going to show you a fun way to do that. So we're just going to cut, we're going to find a little angle and just kind of snip off one corner on the top. Then to make sure it's even, we're just going to line this up with the other side. So that little scrap is going to get lined up with the other corner. And then you're going to take and line your scissors up and just snip it off. And then you basically have a perfect little tag there. Super cute. Then to make the hole, you're just going to need something that you can make a hole with. So if you have a 1/8 inch hole punch or some other type of hole, a 1/4 inch hole punch, that would work. I'm using a take your pick tool, the pointy end, and I'm just going to find the center with my eyes and just push all the way in to make a nice hole like that. And that gives me my tag. Then I'm going to take my twine and I'm going to feed it through the hole. And I'm just going to cut off kind of a section of it so that I can tie it later when it gets, after I've put it onto the card. So I'm just going to leave that threaded through like this. And we'll set this aside. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scissors. And the Stampin' Up! Snips are a wonderful pair of scissors. They're especially good for detail work like fussy cutting. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to very gently and carefully go around the outside edge of this bee. And I like to leave a little white border, especially on a card design like this where the background that I'm putting the bee on is also white. This helps you really won't see the edges, even if they're a little bit uneven because it's white on white. What you're really going to notice is just the bumblebee kind of sticking up off the card. So don't worry too much if you're new to this technique and you're not comfortable cutting things out. What I'm doing is basically I'm placing the cardstock in the middle of my blade and I'm just kind of moving the cardstock and closing the scissors at the same time. I'm not really moving my scissors. I'm just really, except to close them, I'm just kind of twisting the cardstock around. And if you have to cut off some of the excess, by all means do that, because sometimes that can make it a little bit easier. I will do that as I get closer to the end. So I'm not being too particular about this. I just want to go around the outside edges and leave a little white border. And now I'm going to cut off some extra so I can get in here a little bit closer to these antennae. There we go. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Just do your best to make it as tidy as you can. This does take a little bit of practice, but once you've done it a number of times, you'll get better and better at it. And like I said, It doesn't need to be machine perfect. It is a handmade card. So now we've got the bee. The last little thing we need to do before we add the sentiment is to trim that off too. And I'm gonna trim it at an angle. I'm just gonna use kind of an angle, and then I'm gonna flip it and do the same angle here, so it looks like it's kind of special. It makes it a little bit more special when you angle cut. It's almost like a little die cut without die cutting. And then speaking of die cutting, the last thing we need to do to finish the card is to create the little gold foil honeycomb. So I'm going to bring in my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. This is the little mini one. It retails for about $63 through the Stampin' Up website, and it comes with about a 3.5-inch cutting plate. And it's really perfect if you're a Stampin' Up, if you're a Paper Pumpkin subscriber. It's the perfect size because the dies will never be bigger than this when you're die cutting using a Paper Pumpkin die set. In fact, about 85% of our dies fit through this machine, which makes it a really handy little tool. It can really add some fun dimension, being able to die cut when you're making card projects. And it folds up very easily. This is a very small machine. It transports easily and it folds into a nice little size. So then I'm just going to pull this off, and I'm going to use my little take your pick tool again, and I'm going to poke through the little honeycomb, and here it is. It's this beautiful little gold accent. And now these can be set aside, and I'll clean all that up later. And now we'll just go right ahead and get back into making the card. So let's pull in the supplies and we'll finish this up. So I'm going to first take some of my adhesive and add this layer to the inside of my card. And I find that tape runner is a little easier for me to use than the little dots that come with the kits. I just prefer to use a tape runner adhesive. So it's really your preference, but if you have leftover dot adhesive from your kit, by all means use that. So that's the inside of my card, and this is the outside. And I don't know if you can see this, but now that it's dried, that honeycomb is a tone-on-tone texture that just adds a little bit of interest to the back of the card so it's not quite so boring. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this panel and we're going to add some of that leftover dimensional adhesive. So I've got some of these strips left. So I'm going to take one of the strips and my scissors and cut it in half. And I'm just going to put half on each part of this panel and remove those release papers. And then I'm going to just position this so that it's kind of centered top to bottom and a little bit more to the left side of my card front, like that. Then, now that it's glued down, it's much easier to tie this into a bow because it's not flopping all over the place. So I'm just going to tie my bow right here onto the tag. And I'll just kind of fuss with it a minute. Just like that. And then I use a separate pair of scissors. These are like little child safety scissors from the dollar store. And I use those specifically for ribbon and twine, because if you regularly cut paper with your snips and then you go to cut twine or ribbon, it's almost easier to chew it off with your teeth than it is to cut it with those scissors. So I have a separate pair that I use just for ribbon, and that, because they're childproof and from a different company, I can tell them apart very easily. So this is the beginnings of our card. Now I'm going to add this little honeycomb to my card front, and all I'm going to do is put a little bit of adhesive right there in the middle, just a tiny bit, and I'm going to stick this honeycomb into it like that. Then I'm going to take that little bee that we die cut, or that we fussy cut, and I'm going to add one of these little tiny dimensionals right to the back of the bee. Remove that release paper and add this on top of that honeycomb so that some of it peeks out and it's kind of centered between the two flowers on the front of my card. And then the last thing to do is to add my little sentiment. So for this, half of it is going to be on top of this tag panel and the other half is going to stick over. So to support the part that's sticking over, I'm going to add a dimensional to that side of the panel. And then I'm going to add a little bit of tape runner on the other side so that it all stays in place. And then I'm just going to position this toward the bottom of the tag so it's nice and straight, top, you know, even with the bottom. And then I'm just going to push that adhesive in place so that it holds it. And that's my finished card. So what a pretty little dainty card using just the supplies, just the stamp set from your kit, but a fun way to use the images in that stamp set to create another beautiful handmade card even after the kit. And all you need are a few extra supplies. So I hope you enjoyed the project for today, and I hope you'll check back next month for the Paper Pumpkin Extra from the April 2025 Paper Pumpkin kit. Thanks so much for tuning in.